So I'm going to introduce myself and my company briefly to kick this session off. My name is Philip Kopp. I am the CEO of Conectric Networks. And Conectric Networks is a sensor company. We manufacture wireless sensors for monitoring environmental and energy conditions, primarily in near real time, for the purpose of making buildings more intelligent and ultimately healthier and more productive and environmentally sustainable. And we, provide the sensor networks and connectivity options that enable retrofit of large-scale buildings and operations for the collection of these new types of data sources.
Wonderful. Facilio is a software platform for operations and maintenance in buildings. It's a portfolio-wide solution that allows property owners, operators to consolidate data from building systems, sensors, and whatever operational data that is in buildings, building systems, and unify all of that data and offer functionality that is kind of siloed in multiple places in operations and maintenance today. The software solutions that you see for maintenance management or service management and tenant engagement or occupant management, things around energy management and fault diagnostics. All of these functionalities are offered as solutions on top of our platform. And the platform also allows customers to build specific solutions around automating their operations. It's a IoT platform, so to speak, because we're working with the systems data and data from buildings, but it's a bi-directional integration with the building system, so you can actually automate, not just collect data and use the data, for analytics and use that data in your workflows, but also go back in and change things in your HVAC system or whatnot to really automate workflows in your property maintenance and operations. That's in a nutshell what Facilio is.
Excellent.
And in today's session, we're going to be focused on IoT in smart buildings, right? And that has a role for both hardware and software in how this is going to shape up the industry and how it's going to transform smart building solutions. So I think Phil will actually provide a lot of insights around as a hardware vendor in terms of how he sees the market and solutions in smart building space. And I'll do the same from a software perspective. But talking about technology, would you like to kind of weigh in on what's really holding us back, or from a technology perspective, how do you see what's the current ecosystem like, and where do you see the challenges lie in adopting some of these changes that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think this is an incredible subject we could speak about for a very long time. I'm going to kind of draw on the first three pillars that I mentioned, and then maybe weigh a little bit in on our perspective in terms of the architecture of how this needs to work. And I think fundamentally it starts off with that initial comment you made about the unification of data across different siloed systems. And what we see even today, by and large, in the marketplace is a lot of discrete products or systems that solve a particular problem. And so this kind of drives the industry into what I call an integration or deep integration model, where you have many, many disparate systems that the building operator has to manage and the tenant has to manage, maybe separately or together, and trying to tie all these together in a way that makes them essentially because as you know, if you have 10 different systems to manage, it becomes very burdensome and very cumbersome to sort of operate all those independent systems. So going back to that particular point, the way we looked at this from Conectric's perspective is that there are many different use cases to solve for in the building. And so that could be, the utilization we discussed. It could be indoor air quality. It could be HVAC operations and controls, or lighting systems operations and controls. It can be data. It can be unified, voice and video. There's so security. There's so many different functions and use cases that are happening within, each of these built environments that are pretty complex. And so we said, we want to kind of simplify that process by unifying from the hardware side, the architecture, so that the building owner can have a single set of infrastructure, and then a plethora or various different types of sensors that are going to provide for each of those use cases. Whether it's utilization or energy management or energy information systems or greenhouse gas reporting and carbon mitigation and some of those other things, which I think are also more not in the short term, the reoccupation term, but over the long term, going to be incredibly impactful on the value of real estate, those non-financial aspects. So we wanted to design and architect a solution where you could kind of put it in and grow and install and enable those individual use cases over time without having to do it all at once and without having to buy 10 different systems in order to do that. And that general theme kind of drives, our solution and that kind of message of unification of what it is. And the end result is, we have a basic set of infrastructure that can read in near real time of many various different types of sensors, from occupancy to temperature, indoor air quality, energy, and so on, that kind of sets that architecture. And I think the real challenge that we're seeing in terms of adoption at this point, and where I believe we're making some very serious breakthroughs, and we're seeing the industry writing specs and RFIs and RFPs that essentially describe this solution. And the main challenges are really around security. How is implementing these IoT devices going to impact the security of both critical, mission critical operational systems that the building depends on to operate, as well as the security of the data and information and IP that tenants and occupiers and the companies that work within these office environments are generating. And so there's a very, legitimate and real concern over how those things come together and how can we responsibly manage that. And then as well, in terms of the overall ongoing operation and maintenance. And I think that's really one of the bigger concerns as well, is if we put in, a new set of sensors or a new set of technology or new software, can it handle what we're doing? Is it going to break down? And how hard is it going to be to maintain that? And if our goal is to actually, streamline the operations and the maintenance of the facility overall, but we're installing technology that requires a whole new set of maintenance procedures, is that really net, is that beneficial? And so, going back, I think those are the key areas that we try to address in terms of the architecture, unification of the hardware and the infrastructure, and then as well as from a maintenance perspective, we're installing battery powered devices, and we need those devices to transmit for 10 years, or at least 5 years or longer, because we don't want them to have to be continuously maintained. And I've been in the wireless sensor business for a very long time, almost 20 years now, and I know for a fact that when a device battery dies, usually the device dies with the batteries. So you need to make sure that these things are easy to operate and maintain and don't create new burdens. And I think if you can get over those two aspects, the security and the maintenance, you're going to find that the people who touch these systems become much more open, much more accepting, much more adoptive to being able to use them when they realize that these systems are not creating new risks and they're not essentially creating new work. They're supposed to create less work. And I think we're really at a turning point where the market is starting to see that, yes, that's possible. And it is technology driven, frankly speaking.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The way I see the challenges in coming from a software perspective, right? I see this as a problem of silos, where in property operations, especially, you're operating a portfolio, much of it handles at a very building level, right? So you have different teams operating buildings, maybe third parties working on these buildings, and there is no unification of any sort. Maybe thanks to the ESG reporting standards, evolving, there is some sort of visibility into how these buildings are operating from an energy and sustainability perspective standpoint. But beyond that, and as portfolio owners are figuring out now, it's hard to get. They lack the visibility of what else is happening in the building. From a back to work readiness, everybody's kind of scrambling to see where those buildings are at. And the problem is because most of these are operated in silos with their own independent systems, teams that are far remote from other buildings or other operations at a portfolio level. And even within these buildings, all the systems are kind of silo. And for the kind of challenge that you're talking about, bringing in new sensors and all the data sources, deploying all of that, none of the existing systems are adequate to handle any of that data. And as you rightly point out, that is going to add more in terms of maintenance and risk standpoint. It's going to add a lot more to the plate rather than making it simpler, making life simpler for O&M stakeholders. So looking at how these systems are kind of inadequate to the challenges that are in front of us, it's going to be fundamentally a new kind of architecture, new kind of solution that is required to kind of tackle the problem that we have here, and to bring about all the transformation that you're talking about here, and that rightly involves a lot of hardware and sensors, as you point out, but also has a lot of bearing on how the software systems are deployed and architected and across portfolio, not at a building level, but across portfolio. Right? I see this as I mentioned silos, but I also see it as a data silo and functionality silo problem. So right now we don't have data unified across the buildings and systems, so it creates a data silo problem. And you also have a lot of these point solutions being used. You use a separate software for maintenance management, and a separate software for energy management, energy reporting, ESG, benchmarking, another software for fall diagnostics. A lot of it is done even at a property level. So you end up using different systems in different properties. So it's not even consolidated at a portfolio level. So you end up with a lot of functional silos as well. So you have data silos and functional silos, and it's hard to kind of have a streamlined operations across these systems and teams and data that is dispersed in all of these spaces. And that's really the challenge. And what is going to be the new architecture and new way of deploying these hardware and software and realizing value in a way that it will simplify eventually the life of O&M stakeholders. Right? So that's really the challenge.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I mean, we see this frequently when we discuss these kinds of projects with customers, because they literally do have different systems in every building. And so when you design an integration, from an integration perspective, we're going to install a bunch of new sensors, and we're going to collect a lot of data about what's going on in that building that the existing systems are not already collecting. And when we look at that, and we have to say, well, there's a different integration point in every single one of your buildings, because there's a different system in every one of your buildings. And what I really like about the kind of partnership that we have that we're talking about, where you combine this sort of hybrid approach of an IoT hardware solution and then a real building management software solution in the way that we're discussing today. What's nice about that is we have a unified, a single point of entry ingestion for all this new data. And then you can combine that together with all of these individual disparate systems that exist in the existing buildings. And what I see the value this unlocking is not really the kind of value that these vertical management systems are trying to unlock. It's a new kind of value. And we really look at it as a data strategy type of a play, in the sense that, a portfolio owner or a building operator or management company or set of tenants that has a large real estate footprint, they don't know what they don't know. And because all these systems are separate, you don't have any idea what kind of value you're potentially losing when you can actually combine these data sets. And you can start to understand, hey, well, absenteeism in the workplace is a direct function of HVAC management. And you don't know that if you don't have those data sets unified someplace, or you might have a hunch, but you can't really prove it. And now with this type of a solution in architecture, you can bring those data points together and you can say, hey, wait a minute, when the temperature is too high or too low above a certain point, less people are here or more people are here. And you can really start to understand much better how that kind of value gets uncovered. And it's a data strategy around unifying all this information. It's incredibly powerful.
Maybe from there we can talk about, you mentioned a new kind of architecture on the hardware side of things in buildings, right? Can you kind of elaborate on how you see this shaping up, and what you think is a good approach to deploying all this new hardware in buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's pretty much what most of my waking hours are spent figuring out. So, we looked at and have been around this kind of space for quite a long time. And as I mentioned, there's been sort of a unification around this IP backbone in the building and plugging everything into the local area network in the building. And then, largely function of trying to get data out into the cloud. And of course, there's certain advantages and disadvantages to doing that. And what we really came in looking at those fundamentals of security and sort of the longevity and the ease of operating and maintaining those systems. And really what we came up with was the need for sort of a parallel architecture for this type of information. And the reality is that the information that's being produced by things like temperature sensors and occupancy sensors and light meters and energy meters is fundamentally a different kind of information than being, transporting Zoom video calls or CCTV camera data or even HVAC controls, low voltage controls networks. And so we thought, you have to design the appropriate architecture for the type of data that you're moving. And what's happened is many of these standards-based type of architectures, particularly the IP-based ones, they really require a lot of energy from an actually operating the device perspective to continuously be talking to the network. And I think when you add a whole lot of devices, and we're seeing office buildings, with thousands of new devices being added into those buildings, what kind of a security footprint and risk does having all those IP-enabled devices? Can a hacker get into a device? We know they can. Can they get into a device and then get on the network and then get into business information systems and then get into operational technology? That's a really big risk. So we're seeing the market coming to us and actually starting to really appreciate the architecture we designed, which is a separate parallel network where all these little devices can speak to each other and then essentially be aggregated and forwarded into a kind of a software platform like Facilio, where the data analytics and even the control can be optimized based on this new information about knowing in real time what your energy demand is on the chiller or the cooling tower or the VFD, percentage, or the lighting levels, or the temperature and humidity in the buildings, and all those kinds of points. So we have all these kinds of data collection points, essentially being collected outside of the network. They're not touching any of the IT infrastructure that's in the building, and they're not touching any of the operational infrastructure that's in the building. They're just collecting this data, and then that makes it much simpler for also the property owner, manager, and tenant to manage, because there's not too many points of entry and egress you have to control. There's basically just one point, which is your edge gateway that you need to control and secure, and it's up to them where the data moves. And so it's a lot more secure that way. And then fundamentally, what it allows us to do is also speed up a lot the timing of that data and not have to wait for 15-minute or hourly data collection periods. But essentially, these sensors can report on an event. If someone opens a door or walks in a room or opens a window, that information is immediately passed through to the analytics and the operational systems that it's connected to. And I think that provides a lot of obvious advantages. Our best way to scale the smart building and intelligent building and IoT narrative is basically say, look, we'll put all this stuff in for you. It's going to collect it. We're going to make it easy for you. But if 5 years from now, we don't exist anymore, it really doesn't matter. You have complete control of all that data. You can build whatever you want on it. You can send it wherever you want to send it. And that thing is just going to keep on working forever, regardless of whether we're there to help with it or not. So I think that's really important in terms of how to scale this. And frankly, we're approaching and we're looking at a massive I think growth in adoption of this type of architecture over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I can't agree more, and really looking forward to how this is going to shape up, and really excited for our own partnership with Conectric, and seeing this deployed in various market segments and use cases. That's really exciting to see. And thanks, Phil. I think we come to the end of it. We run out of time, but I really enjoyed this chat, and I think we should probably do a more elaborate version of it somewhere. Maybe we can host a webinar or something in Facilio. We run a webinar series. Maybe there's a lot to unpack here and a lot to go more.
Yeah, and I think we barely scratched the surface, but yeah, there's a lot going on for sure, and we should continue the discussion.